This is Living Healthy with Your Health Potential, where we explore your options for better health. Brought to you in association with The Woman in You.
Hi, welcome to Living Healthy. I'm your host, Cheryl Worthington-Turgeon. What would it take to change what you think about death and the afterlife? For renowned neurosurgeon Eben Alexander, it took being at death's door. In this episode of Living Healthy, we're back with Dr. Alexander, author of Proof of Heaven, for this first of a two-part follow-up conversation on how his near-death experience has brought science and spirituality together for him. This episode was recorded when Dr. Alexander was speaking at the Marion Institute's Connecting for Change event in New Bedford, Massachusetts. Dr. Alexander, we're so happy to have you back on Living Healthy today. We're excited to talk with you about how things have changed since we last talked to you. I'd like to, for our viewers, ask you to explain briefly what your near-death experience was about, and then maybe we can talk a little bit more this time about going forward and how that's affected your life.
Okay, well, it's great to be back. I think to kind of summarize, I had spent more than 20 years as an academic neurosurgeon, thought I understood brain, mind, consciousness pretty well, very much a materialist, scientific materialist standpoint, which is, brain creates consciousness, and that's what I thought. And it was about 5 years ago right now, in November of 2008, where all that changed. I woke up early one morning with severe back pain, then headache, then a grand mal seizure and into coma. And I spent 7 days in a coma, was on a ventilator. When I first got to the emergency room, had about a 10% chance of survival. I was very sick with a rare 1 in 10 million form of bacterial meningitis, and it only got worse during the week. By the end of that week, I was down to about a 2% chance of survival, and then totally shocked my doctors by starting to wake up and then having a full recovery, which they thought was completely impossible. To this day, there's no medical explanation for that recovery. And the deepest part of the mystery is actually what I experienced in the midst of coma. And I only came to realize months later that severe bacterial meningitis, like I had, is kind of the perfect model for human death. The reality is that almost nobody comes back to tell the tale, but it certainly should have gotten rid of any possibility for, dream or hallucination or confabulation or any kind of imaginary anything.
And why is that?
Because meningitis very efficiently attacks the neocortex, the outer surface of the brain. And that's the part that endows us with all of our human properties. And in fact, every bit of your conscious experience since before you were born, according to modern neuroscience, depends on some part of that neocortex being actively involved in the processing to put together conscious experience, awareness, and memory. And yet, my brain was demonstrably disabled, my neocortex very badly damaged, which is clear to my doctors from my neurologic exams and from my scans. So I should have had no experience at all. And yet deep in coma, I had first this earthworm's eye view, very primitive, coarse kind of underworld experience that I think was the best consciousness my brain could muster while it was soaking in pus, my physical brain. And then from that, this spinning white light that opened like a rip in the fabric of that ugliness into this verdant, ultra-real realm that I call the gateway. Beautiful butterflies and a beautiful girl, souls dancing, angelic choirs above, just a very rich, extraordinary, alive, spiritually rich environment, far more real than this earthly existence. And then from that realm, using once again the sounds, vibrations, the music of those angelic choirs as a transition up through this portal into higher and higher levels out into the core, formless, eternal, infinite, inky black void filled to overflowing with the divine love of that creative source. Awesome beyond any description, and this brilliant light of this orb, brighter than 10 million, or brighter than a million stars, and such an extraordinary journey, and then cycling back through over and over again through those realms, and then coming out to try and understand it all as I came back from that coma, and spent, the meningitis had been so severe at disrupting my neocortex that when I first came back, and for the lion's share of that journey deep in coma, I had no words or language, but pure conceptual flow and understanding far richer than what we have in this little bottleneck existence of the apparent here and now in the earthly realm.
Could you explain that difference a little bit?
Of that ultra reality and of the gateway and core
and coming back, what your understanding was, how that was different from what it was before.
Well, when I first came back, as I said, the words, language, everything was gone, and but when I was first waking up, I had this extraordinary memory of everything that had happened deep in coma, of the gateway and core realms that I talk about in the book. And I knew that full well, and yet I had no memories of my life before. I had no context in which to place it because my brain had been so badly damaged. But again, due to the miraculous nature of my coming back, very rapid healing was in order. You often encounter that in near-death experiences where people can have absolutely lethal and should have killed them disease, and yet the whole thing reverses and goes away with what we would call a medical miracle when they come back. And of course, for me as a healer, as a surgeon, as a physician, that's fascinating. But of course, that's another topic. But coming back, the words and language came back over hours and days, my childhood and youth memories over a few weeks. My memories of 20 years experience in neurosurgery, everything about brain-mind consciousness, all my knowledge of physics, chemistry, biology, took up to 8 weeks to come back. And all that time I was very busy writing down this incredible odyssey that I had been through deep in coma. That was all very fresh in my mind at the get-go. For one thing, I was worried that those memories would disappear, like the memories of any kind of experience or dream or hallucination. And of course, shocked much later to find out, especially after I read the near-death literature and realized that very commonly near-death experience memories do not fade at all. And it's because they are not experience or awareness that occurs in the brain. They occur at a much deeper level of our true, eternal, spiritual soul. And that's why those memories are so resilient. And they're not laid down, in the same fashion that a lot of the more brain-based memories are laid down. But as I was busy writing all this down, I was doing it mainly in the context of trying to explain it as a brain-based mechanism. I mean, I came back transformed, but not remember anything I'd ever learned about brain-mind consciousness. And my doctors kept telling me, well, you are way too sick to have experienced anything.
Do you spiritually have an idea of why this happened to you?
I, for the longest time, was just trying to analyze it, look at the scientific data. I thought, well, the rarity of it, the fact that it was a 1 in 10 million diagnosis, spontaneous E. coli meningitis in adults, extremely rare. And then my recovery was even more unusual, to come back when I had about a 2% chance of survival, no chance of recovery, or a full neurologic recovery. And yet over 3 months, I came back to where I was, in some sense, even better than I had been before in terms of my cognitive and mental function. That was completely inexplicable, but I think those rarities were there to help keep me focused. And also there because you don't see a lot of doctors kind of coming up out of the woodwork and saying, well, we do see this now and then. His case is not so miraculous. No, they know it's a miracle. Now, of course, you do get some of the cheap shots from people who do not have such an understanding of medicine, brain, mind, meningitis, and neocortex. And they come out of the woodwork saying, oh, well, it was a hallucination or a dream, because they have no clue what in the world happened here. And yes, the medical professionals who know about this disease will tell you it's a miracle I can put 2 or 3 words together, much less write a book about it and go around talking about this. And so it is a much deeper mystery, and all that did happen for a reason. It took me a long time to admit that, but I think we're all here for a reason, that we all have a purpose, and this just so happens to be what is part of my journey, my soul journey at this point, is to go through this experience and to share the lessons that I learned from that and that I continue to learn from deep meditation. I work with a group called Sacred Acoustics in developing tools, sound files for journeys, for deep transcendental conscious states. So the work with Sacred Acoustics is a way of helping to deliver tools to the world that help this world grow and go to the next level. A lot of that is through meditation, centering prayer, what have you, but it's through those kind of mechanisms that I'm able to continue in getting right in touch with this very same realm that I encountered. And I often tell people, you don't have to die or almost die to get this, but you do have to put in the work. Mm-hmm. And that involves going deep into one's own consciousness. That's where the answers are.
And over the last couple of years, how has this changed the way you react or impact the world around you?
Well, I would say it has changed everything. And I was changed very much when I came back. As I said, my entire experience before had been deleted and then came back into my knowing. And that in itself is quite a mystery that I'm only beginning to unravel. How that happened. So I was transformed, but the real transformation that was absolutely from the very sub-basement level up came a few months later when I started to glimpse just what had happened and the power of the message and the fact that I had severe bacterial meningitis, which is the only diagnosis that could have allowed me to come to the conclusions I did about the reality of this experience and what it tells us about the nature of our soul, spirit, consciousness, and how that is at the core of all that emerges in physical reality. And that understanding didn't even really begin until a few months after my coma, as I came to some realizations, as I tell the story in Proof of Heaven, tells what was going on in my life and what happened to help me realize the true nature of the journey. So that, for me, was a tremendous gift. And I finally came to realize, well, maybe this did happen for a reason.
Mm-hmm. Going forward, what is the message that you would like to share with other people? Especially in the times that we're living in? I think I really believe in divine timing, and I think the timing of your experience now must have a profound message for these times of crisis.
I would say that is absolutely true. In looking back on kind of my experience and kind of the context of it, and to really make sense of what is going on here and to put it in perspective, I would say one has to look back over anywhere from 3,000 to 6,000 years of recorded human history and realize that there is a certain destiny here that has everything to do about our growth as as humans, as humanity, as life on Earth, and having very much to do with life far beyond the bounds and consciousness far beyond the bounds of this planet alone, because there is so much more out there, as I mentioned in the book. And to realize that my going through that, growing up in the mid-20th century and late 20th century, and my scientific materialist beliefs, all of that was part of a bigger plan that doesn't necessarily point out the direction we're headed. To really sense the direction that our destiny is following, one has to go back a lot further in time. And to me, it's very much part of the timing and kind of a divine plan that some of the kind of planetary cataclysm that we've set up here at this juncture in our existence is part of cracking the eggshell. And that so many features of that, and that includes the materialism of the 20th century, which was a necessary stepping stone in our learning. But it involves realizing that some of the greatest wisdom of the ages that is applicable as we move forward has been with us for thousands of years. And again, I'm very much a scientist. I would say more of a scientist now than I've ever been. But I realize that that pure materialism absolutely fails miserably. And that's why I often make the point that reductive materialism, as conventional science would be called, that is, if we can explain everything about electrons, protons, quarks, subatomic physics, chemistry, biology, then we can explain everything there is. And that's a myth. It's smoke and mirrors. Because in fact, that conventional science is totally clueless on any explanation for how consciousness might emerge from the physical brain. It's called the hard problem of consciousness. And it is absolutely at the core of understanding where this is all going. And so science is now at a juncture where it becomes greatly strengthened by spirituality. They strengthen each other. And the science, or the spirituality, brings to that mix a knowing that consciousness is a far deeper mystery, that in fact it's at the core of all that is. And of course quantum mechanics, the results of those experiments, that's been trying to tell us for more than 100 years. And yet the physics community has been kind of slow on the uptake. And it's mainly because of a complete lack of any kind of knowing or understanding about the mystery of consciousness that has allowed the physics community to be kind of in the doldrums and lack a direction in coming to grips with the deep enigma of the results of quantum mechanics. But by realizing that soul, spirit, consciousness is absolutely real at the core of all that exists, it starts to make it much clearer how all this really works. And so that's what spirituality kind of brings into the mix. And one of the major contributions from science has to do with the fact that materialist science, science and cosmology, string theory, quantum gravity, the various approaches now to understanding the very nature of our existence, of this physical world, are right there at a point where the materialists are basically telling you there's no material to the material world. It's vibrating strings of energy in higher dimensional space-time or something like that, but it's nothing like what it appears to be in our everyday existence. And the important part of that, that kind of helps in that whole notion, in the religious traditions and in the Old Testament and in other of the Abrahamic faiths and all, this idea that kind of the material body comes back, on some day of reckoning, Judgment Day, when the material bodies are resurrected. Well, in fact, the material bodies don't really matter. But there's a much deeper aspect of us that truly is, which is our soul, spirit, and that's the part that does matter. And so, in fact, the science brings to the mix, don't get caught up in the illusion of the material, because that is not, this is a costume. When this act of the play is over, my soul spirit gets rid of this costume. I reunite with my higher soul, go through my life review, do that with soul mates, and then we come up with our reincarnation plans and come back in to learn more lessons as we're ascending as a soul group to higher and higher levels. And so it's really kind of understanding that addiction to the material side is false. And that's what kind of modern science will be bringing into the mix.
Now, why do you say that the materialism was so necessary to us?
I say it's a necessary stepping stone. And part of it is realizing that the materialists themselves are the ones who are going to be coming out with there's no material there. Vibrating strings of energy in higher dimensional space-time is kind of where that kind of thinking is headed, but the mysteries go far deeper than that. But even 50, 60 years ago, John Wheeler, Carl von Weizsäcker, renowned and very brilliant physicists, were working around this idea that pure information is at the core of all that exists. That if you strip it all away and get to the very heart of subatomic particles in the subatomic world, and string theory is going the same kind of direction, that at the core of it all is pure information. And for me, it's a very short sidestep to go from pure information at the core of all existence to an infinitely loving and powerful deity beyond any kind of words or description that is the creative informatic source of all of that. And of course, near-death experiencers by the tens of thousands bring back the message that is all about a very deep love of the Creator for the creation, for all aspects of the creation, that each of our souls is part of that. Our consciousness is a very direct link to that divine, to the oneness that we all share, and to the divine. And so all of this fits completely with modern interpretations of physics, cosmology, and to me that's why the false boundaries that say, oh, well, you're either spiritual or you're scientific, and the false boundaries between religions that say, oh, well, our religion is the right one, the others are wrong. Right. Well, those are very false boundaries because they're these definitions that are dreamt up by humans trying to figure things out, but way too limited in their conceptualization. It's by rising above those false boundaries and starting to see the power in the true signal and the message buried beneath. You know, that not just near-death experiences over the last 50 years, but also the afterlife literature going back 3,000 years, the writings of religious mystics and prophets, is all pointing to a fundamental reality that's all about who we truly are and why this universe truly exists. And that is what we're getting closer to as we work through all this. But a big part of it is realizing that this pure materialism, as modern materialists will tell you, is not at all what it appears to be. But I think even that kind of arch dualist, René Descartes, if he were forced to say which one is primary, you know, mind or body, he would have to say mind is the primary thing that drives all the rest of it. And that is exactly what I think we're converging on. But part of that is realizing that birth to death, that's all there is a myth. It's false. And that when our brain and body die, our consciousness is actually liberated to a much higher level. And we don't have to wait till we die to find that out. We can actually come to know that through deep meditation, centering prayer. Again, that's why I love developing the tools with sacred acoustics to bring out meditative auditory files to help people get into deep transcendental conscious states.
And what sort of vision do you have for the world as people do more and more meditation and really increase their awareness?
My view is one of great optimism, and it has to do with the fact that this is part of our destiny. And it has to do with realizing that the status quo and the pure addiction to materialism that's been so rampant for the last century or more is false and does not take us towards truth. There's a much deeper truth that we can all come to know within our own consciousness, and it has everything to do with bringing science and spirituality together, where they strengthen each other tremendously. And that can occur by broadening the boundaries of science to fully embrace this deep mystery of consciousness, and that consciousness, soul, spirit is the most fundamental aspect of all that we can know, and to realize the power that mind, consciousness, soul, spirit has to manifest in physical reality. And of course, this is part of the lesson of quantum mechanics, but it's a deeper lesson that we're moving into now, is that kind of understanding. I think a crucial aspect of this is to point out, before my coma, as you know, a reductive materialist, conventional neuroscientist, believing brain creates consciousness. Obviously, when brain and body die, that would be the end of awareness, and that's not the case. In fact, our awareness is enriched greatly. Part of understanding that is to realize that that very simplistic model that I used to believe in also says the only way we can know anything is through our physical senses attached to our brain. Well, it just so happens that that is completely false. Non-local consciousness is an absolute reality beyond question. For the scientists out there who want to pursue that, I would recommend the book Irreducible Mind, Toward a Psychology for the 21st Century, written by Ed Kelly, Emily Kelly, Crabtree, Gauld, Bruce Grayson, the whole group from University of Virginia, Division of Perceptual Studies. Also Pim Van Lommel's beautiful book, Consciousness Beyond Life. And those books go a long way towards helping people to understand non-local consciousness that is an absolute reality. And at a superficial level, it suggests consciousness is a quantum phenomenon having to do with entanglement, having to do with the fact that non-local passage of information, not stuck in time and space, is observed in the quantum world. That's part of what makes the quantum mechanics experiments so kind of bizarre and difficult to reconcile with our everyday thinking, and yet that's the nature of reality.
So if we take that concept and provide an example of it, are you talking about, for example, two people, totally unrelated, getting the same idea at the same time?
Well, that's one way of looking at it. I mean, twin telepathy is a very common phenomenon that's noted. There are twins in my family. And yes, absolutely, the telepathic connection is very strong, and you can't doubt it once you start to hear more and more about it. And yet I kind of, before my coma, thought, well, I don't know what to make of that. But I didn't think it was real. I was so stubborn about facing the facts that I just ignored it. And that's why I think it's so important for those who truly want to get deeper into understanding the nature of the truth of our existence, is to open their minds to realize that this is all very real, and there's some beautiful lessons about the nature of our existence going into it. But you're right, people can dream other people's dreams. Creativity is something that is unlimited in this realm. I think it's the source of all great creativity and insight. And it's something that we can all develop, through meditation. Again, the Sacred Acoustics works. We have certain modules we work towards that have to do with just that, with creativity, with opening the mind, getting into universal consciousness in a very broad way.
And one last question. If people want to explore acoustic meditation that you're speaking of, how would they do that?
Well, the thing I recommend is go to sacredacoustics.com, and that's a website. I work with Kevin Cossey and Karen Newell of Sacred Acoustics, really on a frequent basis. And day and night they are working to enhance these meditative audio tools, bring out audio tools that are very helpful in a variety of circumstances having to do with sleep, dream, napping, dementia, concentration in children. Lots of different projects to develop tools that help us get much deeper into consciousness, into non-local consciousness, into that universal consciousness, which is something we can all use to tremendous benefit, and that is part of changing this world.
For more information on Dr. Alexander, you can visit his website at lifebeyonddeath.net. For more information on the Marian Institute, you can visit them on the web at marianinstitute.org. Thank you for joining us today. I'm your host, Cheryl Worthington Turgeon. See you next time on Living Healthy.